Okay, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining today's session, day 2 of the Developer Bootcamp. This is a collaboration event in association with the Atlanta user group and the Phoenix user group. And we are in the day 2 of our bootcamp. We're going to look at programmatic languages that are used for the Marketing Cloud development. We have completed the certification overview and the data modeling and security by Jordan yesterday. So these are the upcoming sessions in this bootcamp. Next session is going to be by Vlad, that is about APIs. And the next one is data management. And the last day of the bootcamp will be Ask Me Anything panel. So if you have any questions and answers during the bootcamp, during these sessions, or if you have any other additional questions, we will be sending you a form probably in the next session, so where you can fill out your questions, and on the last day on the Ask Me Anything panel, our experts would be able to answer those. And the session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel in the first week of August. All the sessions from this bootcamp will be uploaded all together. And we do have a few certification vouchers to a few winners of the regular attendees of the bootcamp. The eligibility criteria will be like attending all the sessions of this bootcamp. Again, we will be sending you a form to fill out with your details. So from those details, we will pick few winners and handing over the vouchers. And if you have any questions during the session, type them in the chat window, and we would address them at the end of the session. And any other questions or all the updates, we will post them on the Slack channel. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Elliot. Elliot, you can start your screen share now.
Yeah, thanks, JB. I'll give that a go. Here we go. So to confirm, you can see my screen.
Yes. Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Thanks, JB. Yeah. So firstly, hello. Just a few words about me. I've been using Salesforce Marketing Cloud for, almost 80 or over 8 years now. I've written books on Salesforce Marketing Cloud, including a shameless plug for my most recent book, the AMPscript Guide, now in its 2nd edition, which I co-authored with Salesforce MVP Adam Spriggs. And now I'm very active in the user community, and I organize the Marketing Cloud Developer Group, which has been running for, 6 years now. I participate on many levels, but what's specifically relevant, I think, to this session is a subject matter expert in Marketing Cloud certification development. So I actually wrote many of the questions in the Marketing Cloud developer exam, I think 28 in total. So you have me to blame for all those curly questions. Oh dear, what's happened there? Oh, it's a wrong order. I do apologize. So firstly, well, let's get started. So in today's session, I'll be providing an overview of the programmatic languages in Marketing Cloud, which include both AMPscript and server-side JavaScript. They also include a GTL or guide template language, but this really isn't a prerequisite for the exam. I'm happy to go and answer any questions related to guide template language that you may have. So in our session today, I'll be providing an overview of these languages and also recommending areas for you to focus on when studying for the exam. And if you're not already experienced in using the languages, I'll share some links to some online courses where you can quickly get started in learning and using these languages. So what I won't be covering, so while I will be recommending areas of study, I won't be firstly providing exam questions, even though, obviously I wrote many of them. So exam questions are confidential in nature. And while I wrote some questions, I'll never share the actual questions. And I encourage you, if you receive an invitation to go and purchase dumps, then I strongly recommend you report this to Salesforce, as they have a very hard policy on this behavior, and it simply shouldn't be tolerated. Additionally, this session is purely intended to be an orientation to the languages. I won't be teaching you the actual languages. To do so would actually take a couple of days and is well beyond the scope of this session. So instead, as I mentioned before, I'll provide you with details on current and upcoming courses where you can learn the languages in depth, in addition to providing kind of several resources. But yeah, I simply can't teach both server-side and JavaScript language fundamentals and everything you need to know in 60 or 90 minutes. So before we begin, I want to read this disclaimer, and that is this session covers topics that are foundational to Marketing Cloud development. Any similarity to exam questions is purely coincidental. So I want to stress here that I'm not going to disclose any content or topics which will appear in the exam. I'm simply providing recommended areas of study based on common development patterns and use cases to help you guide on your areas of study. So firstly, let's talk about AMPscript. So what is AMPscript? AMPscript is a scripting language for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. You can use it to create highly sophisticated personalized marketing content for email, web, and mobile channels through an extensive set of functions. Now, for those of you who haven't had experience with AMPscript, it can seem intimidating when getting started, but it really doesn't have to be, as the language follows a simple syntax and semantics, making it easy to learn and code. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with AMPscript, let me introduce you to the language fundamentals briefly, but then I encourage you to go and sip one of the courses, and I'll go and share information on that a bit later. So firstly, let's talk about the AMPscript syntax. So unlike other general purpose languages such as JavaScript, Perl, and Python, AMPscript is a server-side scripting language that's been developed for a specific runtime environment, that is Salesforce Marketing Cloud, where scripts are interpreted and executed when the content is rendered. Now, AMPscript is a language in two parts, a syntax and a library of functions. Now, with an understanding of these, it's possible to quickly gain proficiency in the language without prior programming or scripting experience, and create highly personalized dynamic content for direct marketing campaigns. And as AMPscript is a server-side language, the code can be included in any location in an email, a web page, an SMS, or mobile push message. Similar to other scripting languages, AMPscript is interpreted and not compiled, which means it's interpreted in the order that is written. So if you're using AMPscript to include personalized content in an email, the AMPscript code needs to be defined before or at the point where the personalized content should appear. And this is very important to remember, and I'll be talking about this in a bit more detail in the order of operations. So firstly, why do you actually need AMPscript? Well, Salesforce Marketing Cloud is a very powerful digital marketing platform that enables marketers to create dynamic, personalized communication by adding personalization strings to content, and also dynamically display content through creating business rules, such as this dynamic content block we see on the right-hand side. And you can achieve all of this in Content Builder using clicks, not code. But if you want to achieve sophisticated personalization, then AMPscript enables you to further extend the personalization capabilities of the platform. So let's discuss some use cases for when you'd need to use AMPscript. So firstly is performing CRUD operations. That's create, read, update, and delete operations on data extension records. You'd use AMPscript for transforming and formatting data, performing math calculations, and also integration with Sales and Service Cloud, and also most third-party REST and SOAP APIs through an extensive set of HTTP functions. And again, all of this requires you to write some code. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the AMPscript syntax. AMPscript code is contained within a character sequence that opens and closes with double percentage marks and either contains an inner bracket delimiter for AMPscript Blocks, or an equality character for Inline AMPscript. All AMPscript code must be surrounded by matching opening and closing delimiter patterns. Otherwise, the code contained within it will be ignored. And as AMPscript is a server-side scripting language, the code is interpreted before the HTML page is loaded or when the message is sent. So if you inspect the source of a web page or email message in a user agent, like an email client, you won't see the actual AMPscript code, which is different from client-side scripting languages like JavaScript. Now let's talk a bit about the differences between AMPscript blocks and inline AMPscript. So AMPscript blocks are used to define code for interpretation, and they don't display output where the email appears, so where the code appears in the email or on a web page. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule through the provision of two functions, which we'll talk about a bit later, which are output and output line, which are useful for debugging your code. But generally speaking, output won't be displayed where your code block appears. Now, here's an example. So in this example, AMPscript is used to conditionally define a heading to display an abandoned cart email based on the number of items in the cart. We won't review the code within the block, as this is really kind of outside of the scope of this introductory session. But you can learn more about this in a course that I'll be providing you shortly. But it's necessary to show you this example to illustrate how code is interpreted within the context of an AMPscript block. So here, the conditional value or a fallback value defined in the block, we got this variable called heading, is displayed later in the page or in the message using inline AMPscript, which we'll discuss next. Now, also, just bear in mind when working with AMPscript blocks is that a section of AMPscript code does not necessarily need to be contained within an individual block. It can span multiple blocks, as the AMPscript blocks on the page or message are interpreted in a consolidated order. So this alternative example uses a conditional statement that spans 3 AMPscript blocks to determine a heading to display on the page or in the message. So in this case, I've got an if statement that's broken across 3 different blocks here. And again, statements and operators is outside of the scope of this session. Now, let's briefly discuss the differences of inline AMPscript. Inline AMPscript provides a very convenient method of interpreting and executing a function within message content. Unlike AMPscript blocks, inline AMPscript can only be used with a single function. However, nested functions are also supported, and the function output is displayed where the inline AMPscript code appears. This example uses an AMPscript function to display the member's first name. For example, perhaps a subscriber profile attribute, or maybe it's a field from a sendable data extension called first name. And if the attribute is available in the context of the send, then the value is output where the inline delimiters appear in the email or on a web page. Again, we'll talk about the functions a bit later, but the key point here is the output value from the function is displayed where the inline AMPscript code appears. In this next example, an AMPscript block is used to conditionally define a fallback value if a value for the member's first name is empty. So the resulting string is then output in our email using a function within inline AMPscript. And so we'll talk about some kind of commonly used functions that you need to be aware of for the exam shortly. So that's really just a brief introduction to the syntax for those of you who are unfamiliar with AMPscript. So it's not kind of completely foreign to you. So one area specifically you need to be well aware, both when using AMPscript and also I'd recommend for the exam, is the order of operations. So like other scripting languages, AMPscript is interpreted from top to bottom, which means the code is interpreted in the order that is written. Now, this rule is straightforward for communications that use a single page or message, like a web page or SMS message, as the content is displayed in a descending order. However, email messages have additional considerations, as unlike a web page or mobile text message, there are actually several different components in an email, including a subject line, a pre-header, which is the summary text that follows the subject line when an email is viewed in an email client, HTML, that is the formatted message content, and a text body, which is a plain text version of the message used as a fallback for devices and clients that don't support HTML, for example, an Apple Watch. Marketing Cloud interprets these components in the following order: the pre-header, the HTML body, the text body, and finally, the subject line. As such, you need to consider this when coding your email. For example, any AMPscript code that's used in your HTML body can't be used to output content in the email pre-header. Let's go and take a look at this. So in this example, an AMPscript block is used to include a business rule that defines a subject line within the HTML body of an email. So you can see in this AMPscript block here, and we can then go and output this in the subject line using the inline AMPscript that appears on the bottom row. Now let's talk about our functions in AMPscript. As I said before, AMPscript is a language in two parts, a syntax and a library of functions. And there are a total of 148 functions in AMPscript, spanning different functional areas, which can be broadly grouped into working with content blocks, images, and file attachments, performing CRUD operations, as I said before, that's create, read, update, and delete operations on data extension records, and retrieving, formatting, and transforming date and time values. We also have AMPscript utility functions that do things like formatting strings, performing logical tests, and outputting values. And finally, integration with Sales and Service Cloud, Microsoft Dynamics, and also most third-party REST and SOAP APIs through a set of HTTP functions. You can review the arguments accepted by these functions in their Salesforce Marketing Cloud Developer Center, or visit our ampscript.guide for our online version of our book for comprehensive documentation on all supported functions, along with supporting code examples. So let's now discuss what an AMPscript function is. So AMPscript functions work in much the same way as they do in Microsoft Excel. So if you've ever used Excel, you'll actually pick up AMPscript pretty quickly. So that is, input values or arguments are set for a defined function by passing the arguments in a comma-separated array contained in parentheses following the functional name. These are then interpreted by the platform and in turn return a value. So let's now take a look at an example AMPscript function. So there are several AMPscript functions which allow you to interact with data extensions, and the commonly used function is the lookup function, which requires a minimum of 4 arguments, which is firstly the name of the data extension from which to return a value, in this case master customers, the name of the column from which to return a value, the name of the column that identifies the row to retrieve, and finally, the value that identifies the rows to retrieve. So in this example, we're retrieving the first name value from a data extension named master customers, where the subscriber key field in the data extension is equal to a subscriber key, which is defined in our 4th argument here. And this is actually a system personalization string. So we will, again, I'll be displaying, talking about AMPscript functions that I recommend you familiarize yourself with shortly. Another area that I encourage you to revise for the exam is exclusion scripts. Exclusion scripts use AMPscript expressions to conditionally suppress sending of an email in real time based on the result of a logical test. And it's available in all applications where you can send emails in Marketing Cloud, including Content Builder, Journey Builder, and also Triggered Sends and Automation Studio, as we can see in these screenshots here. So the way it works is a simple AMPscript expression. You don't have to use, and you can't use, in fact, inline AMPscript or AMPscript blocks. And if it resolves to true, then it will suppress that email from being sent. So let's say in this scenario, I've gone and built a journey and I'm just testing the journey. I only want this email to be sent to contacts or subscribers that have, let's say, domain.com in their email address. So in this case, I'm using the domain AMPscript function to go and extract the domain from the email address. So email ADDR, this is a system data personalization string. And so if it does not equal domain.com, then the email won't be sent. So why would you use something like this? Let's just say maybe I've created a journey in Journey Builder with a Salesforce audience. And as you're aware, you can't really test this. The only way to test this is to actually create or update a record in Sales Cloud that meets the entry criteria, so they're admitted into the journey. But obviously, as soon as you go and activate the journey, any customers that also meet the criteria will also be injected into the journey. So simply by including this exclusion script in your email activity within your journey will ensure that emails are only sent to subscribers that and have a specific domain. So to learn more about exclusion scripts, actually, I've got a video that I'll be happy to go and share with you. So let me go here, just 1 second. I'm not quite sure about this build up. So recommend areas of study then for AMPscript. So firstly, it's very important that in addition to the content that I've covered so far in these earlier slides, I encourage you to understand the language syntax. That includes what are statements in AMPscript, operators, variables, things like comments, kind of I guess the language fundamentals, which I simply can't cover, in this very brief orientation session today. I will, however, again, be giving you a link to an online course, and you can go and get this, watch this course for free, delivered by me. It's a 75-minute course, and will teach you everything you need to know about AMPscript, and really kind of equip you to go and sit the course. What I really want to focus on, however, is that the functions I believe that you should be focusing on to prepare for the exam, as these are very commonly used AMPscript functions, and that they may come up on the exam. So the first is mobile connect functions, and what I've done is I've got our AMPscript guide here. I'm just if you go to ampscript.guide, you'll see they're all organized down the side here. So we've got mobile connect functions here. So these are obviously sending, they're related to personalization within SMS messages. So we can go and do this. You've got this one, creating an SMS conversation, where you can go and create a I'll give you a link of what an SMS conversation is if you're unaware of that, but essentially you can go and trigger a message to be sent if a subscriber replies to the email message, and this actually enables you to programmatically define which message to display if they reply to the message. So we can kind of create these conversation and end a conversation. So go and read the documentation on these 3 mobile connect functions and understand what they do. Another area is data extension functions. So we have many functions related to data extensions. And in the exam, I think that you can anticipate, or at least I would, that the majority of AMPscript questions are related to data extensions. So you have to be very familiar with interacting with data extensions. That's retrieving data either from individual rows, like a field within the row, using the lookup function, which has to be, I think, the most well-used data extension function, but also retrieving a row set and working with row set. A row set is returning multiple rows from a data extension, which includes, we've got a few different functions that do that. We've got lookup rows and lookup ordered rows. Go and take a look at the documentation that we provided and the sample code, which shows how you'd go and use these functions. You'll learn more about working with row sets in the course that I'll a link I'll provide you with at the end. Other areas of data extension functions is like updating data and upserting data. That's insert or updating data. So be familiar with that, and you probably want to know when you want to use update DE versus update data. So update DE is only works within an email, and update data is used in a non-email sent context. They're identical in every way. If you're wondering why you've got these kind of matching data extension or matching functions for insert data, insert DE, why don't you just have one? The answer is kind of quite simple. That the behavior for performing insert, update, or delete operations on data extension records for email sends is actually different in that all operations are completed in a single call after the email has been sent, rather than every time an email is sent. So that is why they've kind of split that up. What other areas? We've got utility functions. So we've got a number of utility functions here. And I just want to steer you away from some kind of obscure functions, which I don't think you would expect to appear in the exam. But all these utility functions are very common. Things like v, which goes and outputs a variable. I'd really recommend you understand raise error. Raise error is used for exception handling and enables you to conditionally suppress sending of an email. Perhaps if some required data is not available at time of send, then you can skip sending an email to a subscriber or even cancel the entire email send altogether. So take a look at that and the examples. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we've got some utility functions which are actually very useful for debugging and outputting a value within an AMPscript block. So here that I'm using this output function here, which will go and output this string here, first name Nora, using this kind of a nested concat function. So yeah, familiarize yourself with output and output line and when you'd use those functions. Other things is these formatting functions are very useful, and from format number, format currency, you really need to know those in addition to format. So I think you're not expected to memorize the arguments that you pass to any of these functions. You just have to identify what the functions are and when you would go and use them. So they're utility functions. What else do we have? String functions. So we've got string functions categorized here for things like going and getting the length of a string, going and transforming a string, maybe transforming it to lowercase, extracting part of a string through the substring function. If you're familiar with all of these, then you'd be well placed to go and sit the exam. What else can you expect to see? Salesforce functions. So as I mentioned earlier, AMPscript has a number of functions which enable you to perform create, read and update operations on records in Salesforce in real time, which is tremendously useful, particularly on web pages if I need to go and retrieve values in real time. On a side note, where are they? They're in here somewhere, come to me. There we go, Sales and Service Cloud functions. So I'd say the main ones would be create Salesforce object, which the name is highly misleading. It creates a record in a Salesforce standard or custom object. Retrieve Salesforce object to retrieve a record and update a record. So they're probably the three ones I'll be focusing on. Yeah, just on a side note, please don't go and use these functions in emails. You can, but when used certainly in the context of a batch send, it's very problematic in relation to object record lock and contention. You don't need to know that for the exam, but please just reserve the use for use on landing pages, or maybe just if you've got kind of a single, maybe a triggered send, you could get away with using it then. What else do we have? Raise error function, which I mentioned, it's part of a utility function. Impression regions. So I'll just briefly explain what impression regions are. And I think they come in a utility function. No, where would they be? String function? Maybe content, surely content functions. There we go, begin impression region and end impression region. What impression regions enable you to do is to go and wrap some content with an opening and optionally closing impression region. And when someone goes and clicks on a link within that impression region, you can then go and view reporting from your report catalog of which impression region that they've actually clicked on. So you can give it a user-defined name. Why is this important? Well, let's say that I've got, I'm doing an A/B test. I've got two different emails, and I've got, the same call to action that appears in both emails, but I want to see which, out of the links to this call to action button, the clicks to the call to action button, how that performed across the two different emails, or maybe within the same email, you're kind of dynamically, or more specifically, you have some dynamic content, or maybe I've got the same call to action button which appears 2 or 3 times in the email. By wrapping it in an impression region enables us to report on not only the link they clicked, but which region in the email that link was clicked on. So yeah, understand how they're used. What else would I recommend? Math functions, which are very common in Marketing Cloud. So there we go. They're all listed here. You can perform math operations such as add, multiplication, divide, and modulus, subtract. HTTP functions, I think, would be important for retrieving records from external platforms. So you can go and both get and post data to external platforms. You can probably ignore the other ones. They're more obscure. This is just ancient. This is, say, HTML browser. This is superseded from early 2000. But I'll just be focusing on HTTP GET and probably HTTP POST too, and what those functions do. Again, use the code examples here provided just to go and try that code for yourself. And encryption functions in Marketing Cloud. So for which you've only got 2, you've got encrypt symmetric and decrypt symmetric. The rest are encoding functions. So which enable you to go and store a so you can go and securely encrypt a string like kind of password or some sensitive data, and it can only be decrypted with if you have a corresponding password, initialization vector, and salt value. So yeah, have a play with those, and you can see many kind of examples. In fact, every single permutation and how you can use these encryption functions here. I've actually recently updated this, and yeah, with other kind of notes. Where are we here? So that's recommended areas of study for AMPscript. Now let's talk about server-side JavaScript. So what is server-side JavaScript? Well, server-side JavaScript, or SSJS as is commonly known, is a scripting language for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So while AMPscript is a proprietary scripting language that enables sophisticated content personalization across channels, SSJS is based on JavaScript, which is the world's most widely used programming language. And SSJS enables you to extend the scripting capabilities of Marketing Cloud through an extensive set of functions. Let me just jump ahead. So there are many use cases for SSJS, which primarily focuses on marketing automation, API integration, and web page development. And while JavaScript can seem intimidating when you're getting started, it's actually very easy to learn. You just need to take the time to understand the syntax and the language fundamentals, which are outside of the scope. I'm not going to teach you JavaScript in the remaining 48 minutes, but I'll certainly give you an upcoming course that you can register to attend. So let me start by explaining, well, what are the differences between AMPscript and server-side JavaScript? Well, AMPscript, as I said before, it's a server-side language that's proprietary to Marketing Cloud. Its main limitation is it does not support JSON. That's JavaScript object notation. It was kind of I joke, built for a different era, back in 2000 originally when it was designed. And it has very limited support for external HTTP integrations. Additionally, these are pure functions like Excel. You can't go and create your own functions in AMPscript. Server-side JavaScript, however, it's also a server-side scripting language, but it's based on JavaScript, and it enables you to interact with platform features and functionality. And so in addition to using it on messages and web pages, we can also use it in automations to kind of automate platform functions. So things like for going and maybe transforming data or performing data validation, and you can together actually also interacting with the SOAP API, Marketing Cloud SOAP API. You can create some really powerful automations. It has a really extensive set of functions. So it's a total of 332. I counted them all in comparison to AMPscript, which you may recall is 148. And it has very strong and fairly robust support for external HTTP integrations. And as this is JavaScript, you can write your own functions. It's just, again, kind of core JavaScript. So SSJS features can really be categorized into two types of functions. We have core functions and platform functions. So core functions enable rapid application development, and that I guess they're like predefined to support common scripting use cases. And effectively on the back end, they're just wrappers for the SOAP API. But in just a few lines of code, I can go and do things like send a triggered send email, for example, using a core function. Then we've got platform functions, and these are actually similar to AMPscript. Say similar, I mean, behind the scenes, many of the platform functions actually use AMPscript, this is separate from the core library, and as a result, they're actually a lot faster and have kind of more properties than core functions. So when you read the documentation, you see core functions and platform functions. This is kind of what it's talking about, and there's actually quite a lot of crossover between the two. Also, we have API functions, which enable you to access the SOAP API, and API functions are also available in AMPscript. I'm just including these for sake of completeness. I don't think that you can expect you know, you may or may not expect, but I would you know, probably recommend that you focus on those other areas of, well, the areas of study I'm just about to mention. And also there's this newer thing called WS Proxy. If you want to interact with the API in Marketing Cloud through scripting, I encourage you to take a look at WS Proxy, which as its name implies, provides this kind of proxy layer for the SOAP API, and you can interact with it just by declaring everything in JSON. It's really very powerful and easy to use, but you don't really. I don't think you can expect that to come up on the exam. It's really a very advanced use case for SSJS. So let's take a look at the syntax for server-side JavaScript. So server-side JavaScript is contained within HTML script tags that has an additional runIt server attribute. So this attribute is important as it provides an instruction for the platform to execute the server-side code within it. Note that this server attribute, this value server, can optionally be enclosed in quotation marks, and you see people typically do this. I don't. It's just an extra keystroke. And there's my closing script here. So you insert your JavaScript code between this code block. So core functions, as I said before, they provide, let me flick for all of these, they provide a very convenient method for performing common use cases, like just quickly going and, I know, retrieving or updating data extensions, or even sending emails, as I said before. It really facilitates rapid development. It's very convenient, but that does come at a cost. It applies an overhead to each call and eats any meaningful errors. So, you know, it kind of doesn't expose that. And also it's, you can't access all of the object properties available in the API objects, just like a subset of them. So let me think of an example of this. Well, let me go and take a look. Actually, let's go to SSJS. Let's have a look at some call functions here. So we've got these are all core functions here. So for things like folder functions, we can go and add folders, you know, which is maybe helpful in automation. Update folder names. We can go and data extension function. We can go and create data extensions. We can go and add or update fields and data extensions. But you see that we've got these, again, kind of just these operations, and limited on the on certain properties on the object. Probably a big example of this would be to maybe, let's go and have a look at triggered send functions for going and sending an email. We can see that there's yeah, it's very limited anyway. This is actually incorrect. It says it does not support use of subscriber key as a valid parameter. I'm pretty sure it now does, but you can see that I can just send an email. That is, I've created a triggered send email just by, you know, these 2 lines of code. But we can't go and you know, go and set the send classification or any kind of define any kind of advanced properties, such as exclusion scripts and others. Core function library. So in order to go and use a core function, you firstly have to load a library to access the functions, and it's loaded using the following syntax here, where you know, core is the core library, and 1 is the version. There actually, you'll see there are many different versions. People use 1, 1.1, 1.1.5. You just need to use 1. 1 will always load the latest version 1 library, and there's no version 2. So just always use 1. Oh yes, there we go. I said there are the 3 libraries available. Now, platform functions, on the other hand, you don't need to load the core library as they exist outside of the core library. And as I said, there's a strong overlap with core functions. I'll just show you here. So we go into platform functions, expand this. We can see that we've got platform functions for interacting with data extensions, for going in, inserting records and updating them. We've got platform functions that perform HTTP calls, which are, again, very similar to, we got get and post. So when would you use one over the other? It really ultimately depends on your use case, but what else? So yes, it really is very similar to AMPscript. So if you're familiar with how to use these functions in AMPscript, it's kind of you just need to adopt that same philosophy to JavaScript, but obviously it just follows the JavaScript syntax. I said before, you don't need to load a library. They're much faster than core functions. And if you have a choice, you probably want to use platform functions for that reason. You use platform functions in message and landing pages and applications, whereas core functions you shouldn't use in messages. And they can be identified by by their object, which is this platform. So they'll start with this platform prefix. If we go and have a look at this code here, you can see get, for example. You can see that this isn't a platform function. Where's the platform function? Where are the platform functions gone? Find platform functions. There we go. So a lookup, for example. So platform, there you go, platform.function.lookup, platform.function. Yes, you'll see that the arguments that we're passing is exactly the same as AMPscript, but in this case, in JavaScript syntax, in this case, I'm passing an array of these 2 values here. So for a complete function reference for both core and platform functions, head over to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud Developer Center. Recommend areas of study for when preparing for the exam and learning server-side JavaScript. So while I can't share their questions, one thing I will disclose, and anyone who's sat the exam will tell you, that there is, you can expect more emphasis on AMPscript and less on SSJS. So, if you're, I'd encourage you to kind of weight your study as such. In fact, in theory, I guess, given that the success rate, you could answer all of the server-side JavaScript questions incorrectly and still pass. But I would encourage you to know the fundamentals, and this starts with understanding of the JavaScript language syntax. You really need to know JavaScript, just basic JavaScript. You need to know what statements operate and operators are, and things like try-catch statements. So if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to go and learn it. I think the best place to go and learn is just on W3 schools. JavaScript. Oh, it's spelled that wrong. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of tutorials on JavaScript on the internet. But this is where I learned, and I learned it in just in an afternoon. So I found this a very helpful starting point to learn JavaScript. So other areas of study for server-side JavaScript, you'd expect to be working with JSON data. That's how to go and take say a string of JSON data and parse that data. So there's a JSON parse function. You probably want to be very familiar with that. Another common use case for working with server-side JavaScript is HTTP functions. So those probably look at both the get and post HTTP functions. There are also utility functions that you can ignore, but just focus on those. Data extension functions. So again, creating, retrieving, and updating data extension records. Probably not creating data extensions or data extension fields, but just the records themselves. And also AMPscript variable functions. So we actually cover this in the AMPscript guide here. There are 2 functions for server-side JavaScript which enable you to go and get AMPscript variables and set AMPscript variables. So you can, in an email on a web page, you can actually kind of switch between the different language runtime environments. That is, I can have a server-side, I can have an AMPscript block which goes and sets a variable, and then I can go and get that variable later on my page or maybe in my email using the get value AMPscript variable here, variable get value. You can see this is a core library here, so we've kind of platform load core, and then also set value to go and set an AMPscript value from a server-side JavaScript, code. So yeah, be familiar with those. So now I'd like to go and spend the main time just a big shout out to some important community resources. Starting with, I'd say, AMPscript.xyz. This is Ivan Razin's blog, both on AMPscript and server-side JavaScript, which is very covers many, I guess, common use cases. This is really geared for existing developers, not if you're getting started, but there's some wonderful content in there from Ivan. Then we got Zuzana Yarchenska's blog on sfmarketing.cloud. Zuzana's done an awesome job in really geared towards developers who are just starting their journey in Salesforce Marketing Cloud and want to understand the basic concepts and how to fulfill certain use cases in Marketing Cloud. We've got How to SFMC, which is a community resource where you can go and there's some good articles and participate in contests. I actually did one on server-side JavaScript and one a few months ago. We've got Adam Spriggs' blog, signaturemoves.com, again, the co-author of the AMPscript guide, which is some great tidbits on using AMPscript. MC Chat is a shameless plug for my vlog, video blog. Let me go to mc.chat on just 2-minute videos on different common tips and tricks in working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and including some kind of one for developers and scripting. So yeah, check those out. What else do we have? Now, I do want to particularly highlight 2. So we have Greg Gifford's blog, gortonington.com, and Greg actually did a series, I think like a 5-part series on server-side JavaScript and getting started with server-side JavaScript. His actually, that's kind of the first article here, but let me just jump into, you can just search for the server-side JavaScript tag here, and you'll see the part, all the different parts to his series here, and about the kind of the coding basics. So if you're not familiar with server-side JavaScript and just want to quickly learn, I'd say this is a kind of great starting point. So if you just want to learn just by reading a blog rather than on a course. And Pluralsight. So this is a shameless course for Pluralsight has now actually an extensive a platform. let me go and search for Marketing Cloud. Salesforce Marketing Cloud developer path, where we've got a number of authors, including Shane Smythe, myself, Susanna is there, and others. So some couple of ones I recommend. Again, shameless plug for this 75-minute course, Creating Sophisticated Content Personalization Using AMPscript and Salesforce Marketing Cloud. You can really go from zero to hero, knowing nothing about marketing, nothing about AMPscript, to actually be ready on your path to proficiency in just 75 minutes. Everything you need to know is in that 75-minute course. If you're not already on Pluralsight, you can actually sign up for a free 10-day trial, I think, a 7 or 10-day trial, and kind of get access to unlimited content for that 7 days, and you can choose to cancel at the end if you want. And then Shane has followed up with an advanced AMPscript course there. But for the developer course, you just really, this would certainly be sufficient to get you on that path to proficiency. Additionally, I've got a, let me go into here. Next up, I'm doing a two-part server-side JavaScript course next month on August the 17th to 18th. We're just in the just working to finalize that, and it will be promoted probably in the next week or two. So take a look out for that. You can follow me on LinkedIn to look out for that announcement, and we'll be promoting that. As a head up, it's a paid course, but it's a token amount. It's $140 for kind of for a 2-hour course, and all proceeds. It's a fundraiser for Mark Benioff Children's Hospital. So all registration fees go directly to the hospital. In fact, you register on their site. So we're working with a hospital. So I'm kind of really excited to be offering that. And again, you don't even have to know any development. The first hour course is a foundation to JavaScript for those of you unfamiliar, and specifically focusing on the kind of the nuances and the bits of JavaScript that you need to know when working with server-side JavaScript. And then the second is focusing on functions and use cases. Yeah, just keep a lookout for that. I'd strongly recommend that you're going to get a lot of value out of it. So that concludes all the content I want today. I hope that's been helpful. And again, the intent is just an orientation to help you kind of prepare to sit the exam. We've now got plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to stop sharing. And if you have a question, maybe JB, do you want to moderate that? Or we've got some great questions coming in.
Yes,
actually, I can see in the chat window, so we can certainly march through those.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Elliot, for speaking to everyone today and just really giving everyone a great overview. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I do have a few questions, and we've had some audience members in the group who have been able to give some great support and answers as well. So one question that someone asked is, you mentioned that we should avoid using Salesforce functions in emails, but what about other channels such as SMS and push notifications? Messages in those channels aren't logged in Sales Cloud like individual email results. So how would you recommend log messages from those other channels so that customer care using Salesforce is able to immediately be aware of outgoing communications?
I'm sorry, my audio just dropped out. Here we go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, my audio dropped out. So there are two questions. One was before the audio dropped out, there was one related to the AMPscript functions, and then how do you go and track using, how do you track other channels such as SMSs and mobile push? I'll answer the first one. So firstly, these two are kind of completely unrelated. using AMPscript is that there are really only two ways to go and create or update records in Sales Cloud, and that's actually using AMPscript or journeys. There are a number of Salesforce activities in a journey. Why I recommend or I don't recommend including these in bulk messages is two reasons. So firstly, retrieve Salesforce object AMPscript function is slow, like really slow. It takes like 3 seconds to go and retrieve a record. And I had a customer said that called me up and said, "Oh, we're sending this email and we're using Retrieve Salesforce Object to go and get that data in real time from Sales Cloud, and we've sent 347 emails so far, and we've done the maths, and it's going to take another 1.5 years for the send to 1.5 million records to finish." Yeah, that's because it's just slow. It just has to kind of do it one at a time. So you can get away with it if it's just maybe you've got in an email where you've got a drip campaign, and I don't know, we've got a few hundred people trickling in a day through that. But if I'm doing a batch send, that's going to be a constraint. The reason you don't want to use that in an email, you don't want to perform the create or update Salesforce functions in an email, is that Salesforce objects is this notion of what's called locking contention, and an object is said to have either kind of a high, medium, or low level of contention based on the number of relationships it has to other objects. Prime example would be something like, I think the kind of a task object, which is like 4 relationships. But where I ran into this is where I was creating campaign member records using AMPscript, and it I sending to 10,000. It sent the first 138, and then the email send failed, and I couldn't figure out why. And what actually happens is that the way that record locking works, it will lock the entire object for modification while that new record is created. And the problem is that when doing a bulk send, Marketing Cloud goes and splits up that send to different batches or kind of slop workers of 500 per 500 each. And so sending to 10,000 records, it's making multiple concurrent requests to go and perform that create or update operation in Salesforce, and then eventually it will just time out. So that's why you shouldn't use it. So the other use case, you should own, it's fine for use in kind of where you don't have that kind of concurrent operation, like on a web page. To answer your other question about how to go and track other channels, two things. So firstly, there did actually used to be, and I think maybe it was in beta, tracking SMS messages in Sales Cloud, and they've since pulled that out. Maybe it didn't work, but yeah, there is no feature, unfortunately. The way I've done it in the past, and actually do it for clients, is actually to create a custom Lightning component that interacts with the Marketing Cloud API to go and retrieve that data when someone goes and opens a record. It will go and load the most recent 10 email activities and SMS and push, but it's all custom development, unfortunately. There's no out-of-the-box solution. Yeah, you don't need to know that for the exam, by the way. So
thank you.
No worries.
Can we use SSJS or AMPscript to make REST API calls via the Marketing Cloud connector to perform CRUD ops on Salesforce or Sales Cloud from Salesforce Marketing Cloud?
Yes and no. No, there's not unlike the API functions for SSJS and AMPscript, which are it's just exclusively SOAP, and you've also got WS Proxy, which is just exclusively SOAP. There isn't a comparable, there isn't publicly a comparable library or functions to enable you to use the REST API, but you can, and I typically do, go and just use HTTP post functions with the REST API That is, you go and obtain an access token using the REST API, and then with that access token, you can go and call any Marketing Cloud API method. So you would need to go and use server-side JavaScript for that. You can't do it using AMPscript, just because the way that you need to go and set some headers. I think in it's a function that's only available in server-side JavaScript, but you can, and you know, I frequently do, particularly, for example, if I want to automate the initialization of the contact deletion process from a script activity. So I can go and certainly, you can go and search for that. There'll be tons of examples to that in Stack Exchange and other blogs, but there's a very common development pattern. Yeah, look, there was, I guess to answer the question though, there was an initiative underway to go and expose WS Proxy for REST. That lead architect, actually distinguished software architect, has since kind of moved on, so it never became public, so which is unfortunate, but anyway, maybe we will see it one day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Another question we have is there a best practice for reading a JSON file similar to an RSS feed to include in an email to be sent?
Yeah, so look, I would actually, if you want to go and parse JSON and display it in an email, I use guide template language in a heartbeat. I mean, you trying to parse it with using the parse JSON server-side JavaScript function is just going to add an overhead. Guide template language does this effortlessly. It's so easy. Go and check out guide template language. There are plenty of examples, and you know, you can actually, this is an open invitation to anyone, head over to my blog, mc.chat, and you can go and schedule a 30-minute call if you get stuck. But I'm a huge advocate for guide template language. The only reason I didn't include it on this call is that it's not really it is a programmatic language. It's not a scripting language. It's a templating language, and you shouldn't, you won't expect to see exam questions on guide template language in the exam. It's like I guess a less common language that's used. But GTL, check it out.
Thank you. Yeah, we did have someone ask if GTL was going to be on the exam. So thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, again, I want to stress that this is just purely based on, I'm not going to tell you what's in the exam, what's not, but I recommend that you invest your time studying elsewhere. Possibly.
With the exam in mind, would you be able to possibly recommend to the listeners what areas of study would be best to study?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's for programmatic languages, everything I've covered in this course today. So that's, you know, we've talked about understanding the AMPscript language and syntax and server-side JavaScript, things like important concepts like order of operations, exclusion scripts, you know, and more specifically, those two recommended areas of study, one for AMPscript, one for server-side JavaScript. If you follow those and you're able to digest that, you will be in a good position to go and sit and pass the exam, at least from, you know, a programmatic languages perspective. So, yeah.
Do you recommend?
Sorry?
Continue. Sorry, I apologize. Continue.
You know, I mean, it's saying, you know, it's overwhelming, right? So we've got what 148 AMPscript functions, 332 JavaScript functions. It's quite easy to spend time not knowing where to start and studying the wrong thing. I encourage you to go and study those two slides. JB will be distributing a PDF, which you can use as a reference. So I'd be studying on those two things. And if you're unfamiliar with the languages, you have to learn them. You have to learn AMPscript and server-side JavaScript. Check out those two courses. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one question that someone had was, can you recommend a good online resource for learning the proper method for creating trigger email sends via an API event?
Via an API, triggered email sends via an API event. So is that, I mean, the context of this presentation would, so maybe that's really one for tomorrow, because this is
That's what
just
they
using
said as well.
AMPscript and server-side JavaScript. Yeah,
That is a
that's the
very
great
good
one for Vlad. Yeah.
Yeah, we can talk to that next. So we'll have that in our next speak. So would you be able to talk more about APIs and how much of that should be possibly studied in the exam, as well as SOAP? SOAP, yeah.
So again, that's really a question for Vlad. I'm just
Okay.
focusing on what's available, what questions that you can expect for kind of recommended areas to study for programmatic languages, server-side
Absolutely.
JavaScript and AMPscript. So which I did mention that there are API functions for AMPscript and server-side JavaScript. I would recommend don't bother studying those. Focus your time elsewhere on those areas that I recommended. Is you may not get questions on those. Let's say.
Thank you so much, Elliot.
Nice.
That is all from our audience with questions tonight.
Okay.
Big help, and a major thank you to you for taking the time to speak with everyone, especially with the different time zones. We really truly appreciate you speaking to everyone. If you aren't already on the Slack channel, please join the Slack channel. Elliot has given many great resources, particularly to some plural sites, to some really good online resources, and some classes that will be coming up, and proceeds will be going to those. Please feel free to join the Slack channel so that we will be adding those resources to the Slack channels, and this recording will be available within the next few days for you to watch and review. Elliot, we cannot thank you enough. If no one has any more questions, I will turn it over to JB for final conclusions.
So before we do, we did get a question from Santosh, which we seem to overlooked. I can't find it though. He's saying, "You've got my question." So sorry, Santosh. I'll make sure we do cover that before we go. I can't find it.
I see it.
Oh, there it is. Where does the trigger a send definition stand in the order of operation? It doesn't. I mean, so a triggered send comprises of a triggered send definition. The triggered send definition defines the email to be sent along with whether you should go and add someone to the all subscribers list or which list to be added to. And then you use that triggered send definition together with a triggered send. So order operation is just purely talks about how OMM, that's outbound mail manager, which actually sends the email, how it evaluates any content and scripts within the email. It's not related to triggered send definition at all. If you still have questions, head over to mc.chat, schedule a 30-minute call with me, and I'll be happy to discuss that at length. But
thank you very much, Elliot. And a person like you, so busy and dedicating some time to help people is really helpful. And I really appreciate your time and effort. If anyone has any questions which are not answered, or you still have something in your mind which you're not able to ask today, next session we would be able to share a form with you where you can fill out your questions. And on the last day of this session, we have Ask Me Anything panel. So Elliot again will be joining that session along with Vlad, Greg, and Jenna. You have another chance to get your questions answered. And this session presentation, we will be sharing it to the same drive that we have shared yesterday. So I will also share the link to the drive in the Slack channel, and the presentations will be uploaded the first week of August. And thanks everyone for joining. And the next session is on the next Tuesday or Wednesday if you're on the other side of the world. That's on API by Vlad. We hope to cover much of the APIs in that session. Thank you very much, Elliot. Thank you.
Thanks, okay, bye.
Bye.